Hi spoilers! This is Emmy. I am so excited to start the Spoiled Librarians YouTube channel with my friends Christine and Julia, where we recap and ruin all of the YA novels that you don't have time to read right now. The Spoiled Librarians YouTube channel is going to be dedicated to everyone who loves spoilers. Whether you just need a recap before the sequel comes out, or whether you don't have time or the inclination to read and you want to know what happens, this channel is for you. Today in my first video, I want to talk to you guys about The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. It was one of my favorite books of 2018. The Cruel Prince starts off with Jude as a 7-year-old. She has two sisters, an older sister named Vivi, who is half Fae, and a twin sister named Taryn. A stranger comes into their house when Jude is 7 years old and murders her parents right in front of her, just runs them through with a sword. Turns out this stranger, who's a red cap named Maddox, was her mother's first husband. Now Maddox, as a fairy, lives by very different rules than mortals do, and he looks at all three of his wife's children as his own responsibility, since in his eyes they were still technically married. So Maddox steals all three girls away to the High Court of Fairy and raises them within his own household. And while his wife Oriana is training them to be highborn young ladies, Maddox is training them in sword fighting and strategy. After being stolen into Elfhame, the timeline jumps 10 years and we see that Jude has become incredibly proficient in a sword and is determined to stay in Fairy forever. The last 10 years have made it her home. She's more comfortable there than in the mortal world, even if on a regular basis fairies are trying to kill her. There are two ways that a mortal can earn their place in Elfhame. The first is by marrying a fairy. Given how tricky and violent fae are, this is not something that Jude is willing to risk, so that leaves option 2, which is to perform some sort of service to the crown and essentially be useful. For the last 10 years, Maddox has been training Jude in sword fighting and strategy, which makes her an ideal candidate for fairy knighthood, essentially. The trick is getting the High King to take her seriously, which as a mortal is going to be something of a feat. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to read the book, go forth and conquer. This is your last point to safely exit the video before we start spoiling things that actually matter to the plot, so stay tuned, here there be spoilers. Absolutely no one in Jude's family thinks it's a good idea for her to fight in the summer tournament to get the king's attention, but she does anyway, because this is the YA novel. And this includes the king's youngest son, Cardan. King Eldred has 6 children, but for the purposes of this story, we really only care about the sons. Baelkin, who's the firstborn, Dane, who's the thirdborn, and Cardan, who comes in at 6th, is the youngest of all of his children. Cardan and Jude are the main ship of the Folk of the Air trilogy. They are also in what I would consider, especially in the first 2 novels, to be in a mutually abusive relationship. They are both terrible people, and they deserve each other. We meet Cardan at the fairy equivalent of school, and one of the first things he tries to do is drown Jude in a river, which is not typical love interest behavior, but bear with me. He doesn't want Jude to fight in the summer tournament, and the only reason why Jude doesn't actually die is 1, because Cardan doesn't want her to, and 2, because he tricks Jude's twin sister Taryn into kissing him in order to let her go. So that's a little gross. The High King has decided he wants to give up his immortality and leave one of his sons in charge. This starts their very own Game of Thrones right in the High Court of Elfhame, and Jude, as a human who wants to stay in Fairy forever, she gets caught right in the middle. Earning her knighthood in the summer tournament didn't work out the way Jude planned. All is not a total loss, however. Prince Dane has an offer for her. Humans possess one very special skill that Fae do not. Humans can lie, which makes Jude very valuable to Dane. King Eldred hates his son Baelkin more than anyone in the entire world. Cardan, his lastborn, is the fairy equivalent of a teenager, which leaves Prince Dane as the next High King of Elfhame. Jude knows better than to give a fairy something for nothing, and so in her bargain, she says she would like a gaze. A gaze being something like a magical vow that will either force the person to do or not do something. In this case, Jude asks for a gaze that will make her impervious to fairy magic, right? Fairies won't be able to glamour her and control her mind or force her to do anything, which has been a huge problem her entire life. Dane agrees to give her a gaze, and it will make her impervious to all fairy magic except for his own, which means that he could still glamour her to do whatever he wants. Jude accepts, and she joins Dane's Court of Shadows, which is his cadre of spies. The next day, Jude goes to school because that's where we meet all the characters in Elfhame. The other students think Jude made Cardan look bad, and they are not wrong. A student named Valerian manages to cram a piece of fairy apple in between her teeth, food being an aspect of the fairy world that Dane's gaze does not protect her from. So this piece of fairy apple makes her incandescently happy, not to mention very susceptible to everyone else's suggestions. So the other fairy students use this to humiliate Jude completely. Among other things, they have her take off her dress, and Cardan asks her to kiss his boot because he is the fairy prince and it is his due. When she bends over his foot to deliver that kiss, Cardan kicks her in the face. It's the taste of her blood that manages to break the spell. When Jude gets home from what is, yes, a terrible day at school, there is a hob waiting for her in her bedroom with her first assignment from Dane. Her job now is to go to Prince Baelken's house, sneak inside, and steal a treasonous secret. Not really one for specifics. The next day, Jude does sneak into Baelken's house and she manages to find a letter, which when she delivers to Dane, we learn is written in Locke's mother's handwriting. Jude also learns that Cardan is living with Prince Baelken and that Prince Baelken is abusing him pretty terribly. That night, Jude learns that her sister Taryn, who has also decided she wants to stay in Elfhame forever, has decided to go with option 1, marrying a fairy. Taryn says she's not going to announce who she's getting engaged to until Dane's coronation. Does that sound suspicious? Because it should. Jude shows Taryn the other item that she stole out of Baelken's house without obviously admitting she took it from Prince Baelken. It's the classic Alice in Wonderland, and when they open it, a piece of paper falls out. She hides it away before Taryn can see it, and the next morning when she gets the chance to look, it is her name written over and over and over again in Cardan's increasingly angry handwriting. The next day at school, Locke smiles at her. He's turning out not to be like other fairies. He wants to spend time with Jude because he thinks that she's interesting and because he thinks that her story is going to be worth watching unfold. On the way home from school, she plucks several different pieces of fairy fruits and vegetables and uses them in small doses to poison herself. She makes herself incredibly sick, hoping to build up an immunity to this aspect of fairy world that can still be used to manipulate her. Members of the Court of Shadows drop by Jude's room every night in order to train her in different aspects of spycraft, and then she wakes up the next morning and does it all over again. School, poisoning, spycraft. One day she drifts off during lessons, and when she wakes up, the student Valerian, who we met earlier, is standing over her with her necklace of rowan berries in his fist. Rowan berries are one of the only things that can protect a human from fairy magic. Of course, Valerian doesn't know that Jude has a gaze that protects her. He uses his glamour to convince Jude to go verbally yield to Cardan, and then she's supposed to go throw herself off a building. If she didn't have Dane's gaze, she would be dead. Valerian was going to kill her, so Jude takes out a very small dagger she carries and stabs him. After yet another terrible day at school, Jude goes home with Locke because Locke is throwing a party and she's been invited. He gives her one of his mother's old dresses to wear, and in its pocket she finds a golden acorn. In the acorn is a message. She knows that she's about to die, and she's begging her best friend to take care of him. We don't know who the him is, but presumably Locke. The next morning, Dane is in Maddox's house, waiting to scold her for stabbing Valerian. He tells Jude to stab herself in the hand. He doesn't glamour her to force her to do it. This is a test of loyalty, and Jude does it. She takes her dagger and stabs herself in the hand. Their dresses for the coronation arrive because King Eldred is still ready to step down. Jude's dress is not at all what she ordered. Instead, it's this beautiful ombre blue with trees all over it. Her stepmother, Oriana, corners her. It becomes very obvious to Jude that her stepmother thinks Prince Dane was there because they're having some sort of affair. Oriana would know a thing or two about how dangerous it is to be a consort because she was one before she married Maddox, and her best friend was one too. Oriana's best friend was a consort, and she was murdered by one of the princes who didn't want another heir confusing the line of succession. Does this sound familiar? It should. It has to do with the golden acorns. The student Valerian shows up in Jude's room that night to murder her, except Jude's trained with Maddox for most of her life, and she gets the upper hand and leaves his dead body on the floor instead. Of course, she barely has time to hide that body before a member of the Court of Shadows shows up and tells her they need to hunt one of Baelken's messengers. Jude's next test is to kill the messenger herself, which she does. Jude gets close to the messenger and realizes he's one of Maddox's spies. Valerian's body obviously can't just hang out in her room decaying, so she drags him outside and buries him next to the stables. They go to the coronation and everything proceeds as planned until it comes time to put the crown on Dane's head, when Baelken steps out of line and murders his brother. Baelken has been acquiring supporters throughout the High Court, and one of them is Maddox, Jude's adopted father. Baelken's new plan is immediately ruined when it turns out his father hates him enough to let the crown wither and die before he puts it on his son's head. So, bit of fantasy world building. The crown that rules over Elfhame is a blood crown, which means that you need to be a direct descendant of the House of Greenbrier, and you need to be crowned by another member of the House of Greenbrier. So Baelkin's ruined this plan almost immediately by killing all of his siblings. The exception being Cardan, who never took his place on the dais at all. When the coronation ceremony descends into chaos, Jude makes her escape by sneaking under a table where she finds Cardan drunk and in hiding. They both realize that they are in an incredible amount of danger, her being a mortal in a court full of fairies who would like to play tricks on her, and Cardan being the last of the Greenbrier line. Jude sneaks Cardan out of the hall and into the Court of Shadows, or what's left of it now that Dane is dead. Everyone is having a little bit of trouble trusting each other, but the court gives Jude 24 hours to figure out what their plan should be. She gives Dane's old spies Cardan to hold prisoner and heads back home. Jude goes home to see if she can find out from Maddock what's going on, and there is Taryn and her betrothed, Locke. It turns out that Locke was fooling around with Jude so that he could test Taryn's love for him, which is super gross and really sets up their relationship. Jude feels incredibly betrayed by Taryn, because obviously she shouldn't have expected anything better from Locke. Jude challenges Taryn to a duel. They fight it right there in the house. When Vivi tries to glamour Jude to stop fighting, the glamour doesn't hold. Even though Dane is dead, his geas is still holding. Jude is impervious to glamours. It's Maddock who breaks up their fight, and he tells Taryn that yes, she can pursue this relationship with Locke, even though everyone can tell it's a terrible idea. He tells Jude that if she can find Cardan, she could trade him for a husband of her own or any position in Baelkin's court. This is what Jude came here for, but she doesn't make the deal. She doesn't tell Maddock that she already has Cardan in her possession and she would like to make the trade. Instead, Jude tries to find Taryn to apologize. She looks all over the house and can't find her sister anywhere. But what she does find on her stepmother Oriana's dresser is a golden acorn. And Jude has an epiphany. Her little brother Oak, Maddock and Oriana's son, is not actually Maddock and Oriana's son. He is a Greenbrier. Oriana did go to her best friend when she sent this golden acorn with a message. She either found her friend dead or in the process of dying, and she cut the baby Oak out of her. Oriana left the palace, married Maddock, pretended to be pregnant, and passed Oak off as her own baby, which means that Oak, Cardan, and Baelkin are all the last Greenbriers. Maddock didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. He now has a son with Greenbrier blood. He has someone he can put on the throne of Elfhame, and it's not Baelkin. Jude decides what to do. They'll put Oak on the throne. Cardan can crown him. They'll need to get Oak away from Maddock so that Maddock can't serve as regent. They can hide Oak in the mortal world with Vivi until he's old enough and responsible enough and has maybe a little more sympathy for humans than the rest of his folk do. She heads back to the Court of Shadows to make this deal with Cardan, and she manages to get Cardan to swear his obedience to her for a year and a day. So, 366 days of Cardan needing to follow her every command. The first command she has is for Cardan to go out in the woods and hide, see if he can gather information and make sure that no one sees him. Then Jude heads off to other courts to see if she can gain support for her choice as king. Once she's rejected from a few of them, she manages to get her way into a lesser court that was never given favor by King Eldred and get them on her side, as long as she can guarantee a more powerful court will stand with her too. She manages to get one of those powerful courts on her sides by promising their king a blank check, a favor of equal value to him standing with her when she anoints a new king. Jude and Cardan walk into the hall when Baelkin is throwing a feast. Everyone thinks that Jude is there to deliver Cardan. Everyone thinks that Cardan is there to crown the brother who raised him as king of Elfhame. Almost immediately, what's left of the Court of Shadows attacks the banquet. They convince everyone in the room that they're there to murder Cardan so that Cardan can't crown Baelkin king. The spies manage to get the blood crown away from them and get it to Jude. Now Jude has the crown, she has Cardan in her control, and Vivi brings Oak into the hall. They've told Oak what to do, but he is still a toddler, so she has Cardan kneel to show him the proper procedure, and then she commands Cardan to stay there for a full minute. She hands the crown to Oak, and she has Oak crown Cardan High King. When Cardan rises, it's only him and Jude who know this was not the plan. Jude has two courts who will support her king of Elfhame, and they step up, and so do the minor courts until everyone has sworn their allegiance. Cardan is pissed. And Jude knows she only has a year and a day of him under her control before there's a High King who's going to hate her. Jude helps to deposit Oak and Vivi in the mortal world. They go shopping at Target, they set them up in an apartment, and when she comes back, she finds Cardan in the throne room. Cardan offers Jude the throne because obviously she's the one who's really in charge. He promises to play the perfect king for a year and a day, and then they're done. So Jude has exactly that long to find a new way to bring Cardan back under her control. Jude takes her place as the head of the Court of Shadows, and they have given her her own nickname, the Shadow Queen. That is book 1 of the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black, The Cruel Prince. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed making it. If you think I missed something vital or I missed your favorite scene, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. Beware, down in the comments, spoilers are always welcome. All of our friends who support us on Patreon get access to videos before they make it onto YouTube. So if you want the most recent releases, you'll find them on our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. Until we read again, I've been Emmy, and it's been a pleasure.